Hi, I'm Ryan.
Hey, I'm Nate.
Hello, I'm Steve, and we're the Dungeon Vets. Today on Book Talk, we are talking about Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. And we're going to look at that story as if it were a Dungeons & Dragons campaign with Dungeons & Dragons rules and mechanics and cool inspirations that you can take away as a player or a DM for your own table. So I've read this story before, and I believe Nate has, but Ryan, you haven't, right? This is your first time?
Yep, I've read other Brandon Sanderson novels, and I'm a fan of Mr. Sanderson's work.
Branderson Sanderson.
Brandman Sanderman.
Brando Sando.
However his name is pronounced. I thought the book was good, and I'll say that I initially thought I wasn't going to like it, and it grew on me and until I got to the very end, and then I ended up loving the book. But in general, I have a distaste for complicated magic systems. Brandon Sanderson's a little bit complicated at times, and this one's really no exception. It's maybe even one of his more complicated magic systems that he's created. But despite all that, I ended up really loving the book. Okay, so I'll give it a 4 out of 5.
It's not Branderson Sanderson's best work, but I do think it's great. So my rating for Warbreaker is also going to be a 4 stars out of 5. Like I said, I don't think it's Brandon Sanderson's very best, but it was still Brandon Sanderson's okay books are like great on the scale when you're comparing them to other authors, in my opinion. I think this is also Brandon Sanderson's most sexually vivid book, or explicit book, which is not to say that this is a sexually explicit book at all, but it's Brandon Sanderson's most sexually explicit book.
Yeah, it's really not explicit.
It's
no King Killer 2.
No, this doesn't even touch on anything that Patrick Rothfuss or George R.R. Martin have done.
Who writes the first law? What's his name again?
Patrick Rothfuss.
Joe Abercrombie.
Joe Abercrombie. Yeah, yeah. It's not explicit like any Joe Abercrombie sex scenes either. It's
Yeah. If you have the word squelching in your sex scenes, you're explicit.
Which book is that?
It's one of them. I remember. I just can hear.
Oh, that's just in there.
Squelching.
And the bloody nine squelched all over. Say one thing for Logan Nine.
Oh, stop it! You're fucking knocking him out of the park right now. Well, my rating, I think, is gonna be. I'm gonna be the odd man out, and I'm gonna go 3.5 out of 5. It was an entertaining book for sure. I enjoyed my time through it, but
you said this was your second time?
Yes. And so I did know everything this was going to happen, and the story itself is good. It was just a little boring for me, a little slow. There was a lot of political intrigue stuff, and I just wanted a little bit more cool magic system fighting and things like that. So I really liked most of the characters. Ciri, Vivenna, and Lightsong I all really liked. And so I kind of wanted more, like at the end when we're seeing awakened clothing being reinforcing people's bodies and joints so that they can jump higher and stuff like that. That's really cool. I wanted to see more of that. And me being the kind of scientific mind that I am, I really enjoyed the discussions between Vasher and Vivenna when he is basically teaching her. I agree with you, Ryan. The magic system is complicated, and I can appreciate any argument that says it's too complicated. But something that I really like about this setting, Idris thinks about breath, biochromatic breath, as magic. Magic is of God, therefore we shouldn't touch it. It's blasphemous, what have you. But Hallandren the country of Hallandren uses breath as this measurable resource. There's this entire economy and religion based off of it. And I thought it was a really, really cool dichotomy of how people use the things that are just around them and inherent to them to then create society.
You read the book, I imagine, right? Would you listen?
I read the book the first time. I listened to it this time.
Okay. I'm surprised you pronounced it Hallandren.
How's it pronounced in the audiobook?
Hallandren.
Hallandren?
Oh, that's just because I mixed up the E and the A.
Oh, okay.
I'm always wrong on these things, I feel.
How do you pronounce it?
because y'all do a lot more audiobook listening than I do. I typically read. And so, like, every book talk we do, there's always something like, wait, that's how it's supposed to be pronounced?
For me, it's probably I can't spell a damn thing because I listen to it all.
Yeah.
And it's all got the weird fantasy spellings.
As I've mentioned, this has happened so many times. I've just come to terms with the fact that I'm just going to keep my preferred pronunciation in my head canon. Each of you kind of touched on the magic system. And Ryan, you had mentioned like you're not like a big fan of complex magic systems, and I'm the opposite. Like Brandon Sanderson especially, like, always has these really cool magic systems, I feel like. And I love that kind of stuff, especially when it's something that's like, it's new, it's fresh, it's original, you know? With Brandon Sanderson, I feel like his magic systems are always a little more original and like more fun to get into. And especially the way they're integrated into society, I think is like really, really makes the world.
I agree.
But the magic system in Warbreaker is they're able to use breaths, which you can kind of use as like an allegory for the soul almost. It's like there's some debate over whether like, oh, is this my soul or not? So everyone is born with one breath, and they're able to give that breath to another person. And the more breaths one accumulates, they get various other like senses. Like there's this life sense.
I think,
go ahead.
Put simply, everyone starts with a breath, and you're at your normal person, your normal human capacity with one breath. If you get more breaths through various different ways that we'll probably talk about as we're reviewing the book, you have greater senses. So more breaths, more senses. As you get more breaths, you can sense even more things. And so the more breaths, the better. But if you give away the only breath you have, you become a drab, which means the world it's more drab. You lose senses, but you get it heightened if you have more breaths.
Important escalation of this too is you can put your breath into inanimate objects and you can awaken them into things that move and can do things. Like imagine Doctor Strange's cloak from the movies. And we see Vasher do this a couple of times. He has an awakened cloak that he throws at people and it wraps them up, and he awakens a little... It's like a D&D unseen servant spell, basically. In the very beginning, he's like, go fetch me the keys. And yeah, and this is one of the number one ways in which people utilize this magic system to do cool things and thieving and fighting and all other sorts of stuff.
And the way it relates to colors is that you have to have something with color in order for that awakening to work. In order to, animate something to do your bidding, which you have to do by using a certain amount of breaths. The more complicated it is, the more breaths you need, and you have to
Are you
give
listening to us right now? It's going to take us 30 minutes for us to explain this complicated magic system.
What? No, I'm about to be... This is like the last part of it.
All right, if you say so.
And so the more complex the command, the more breaths you need. And you also have to envision it properly as you give it the command.
Also.
And it takes color away from... It takes color in order to achieve that awakening. So,
because color is indicator of life, basically.
Yeah. And so you'll see them wearing like colorful things tied around them just to have that color available for use for awakening. And it drains the color from those things and makes it gray.
So yeah, it is complex. A little too complex for some people, Ryan.
I don't think it's all that complex, honestly. I mean, there's a lot to it, but it's...
Well, yeah, it's not complex to me either because I read the book and I get it.
I can tell, Nate, that you absolutely appreciate the scientific mind that went out to laying all these rules out. Brandon Sanderson is very thorough. He loves to attach his magic systems to science, and science is precise. It has rules for everything. He very famously has said limitations are more interesting than abilities when it comes to magic. But... this is certainly more reading and understanding required than the person who picks up Powder Mage.
Absolutely. But and Brandon Sanderson, I think, is a guy who realizes that people are going to pick apart these things and be like, oh, well, if this is possible, then why don't they just do this? And he kind of tries to take care of all those scenarios, those potential plot holes and things like that. And I'm sure there still are some, nobody's perfect. But he really does a good job at taking care of, like, well, this is why. And it's in universe and it's explained.
Speaking of which, what happens to all this stuff that turns gray after it has the color drained from it? Can they recycle it? Can they re-dye it?
That I don't think that's really touched on, but I would assume so. It just the color is drained and it becomes gray. But yeah, you could probably just put dye in it again because the dye still has the color. I think my first question, the first thing that came to mind for me about this is like how, and I literally sat down and tried to do this before, is like how do I make an Awakener in D&D?
I don't think D&D is currently equipped to do that.
Not as its own like class or subclass feature, no.
There are some parallels. I think what I ended up with was making a wizard. I think it was an enchantment focused wizard. And it's mostly all about animate objects and all the different spells that allow you to animate things.
An intelligence-based casting system, I would say.
I don't know. I would almost go say that they're charisma. Like I could see this being like a College of Creation bard.
I think I could see both. I think it might even be like a mad class, you know? You need different skills for it. Just because I do feel like there's a lot of intelligence involved, especially when you listen to Vasher explaining all the different experiments and like the science or the mechanics behind how all this stuff works and all the stuff they tried to do. Definitely screams intelligence to me.
Totally.
However, just the system as a whole, I can see that being a charisma-based thing. I don't think any skill is an exact, fit for this kind of thing, but the way they describe having to like mentally imagine the command you want to give to an object when you awaken it. Could that be intelligence? Totally. Could it be charisma? I think also applicable.
Could be wisdom if you put it that way.
Yeah, when I thought about classes for these different characters, I have 3 different casters listed. So I agree. It could probably be flavored any which way. So let's go to D&D, shall we? Okay, so the story starts off with the quest is you're being sent into, I would say, the party. In this case, it's just Siri at the moment, but you're being sent to this country that you have a tense relationship with, that you have all these theories and rumors about, and you don't really want to go over there. You know that it's going to be dangerous. You know that it's going to be very different from what you're used to, and this is a very cool introduction to a campaign, I think. In this book.
So the book starts with introducing us to Ciri and Vivenna, who are both princesses of this kingdom within the kingdom. It's a kingdom. They are from this black and white society, and they're being thrust into this very colorful society.
They're very austere, and they worship a god named Ostre.
Ostra is how they pronounce
it.
it.
Say what?
Ostra, god of colors.
Ostra. Why would they use E then? That's stupid. It's a stupid spelling.
You know what? If Brandon Sanderson is stupid for that spelling, then he might be stupid for his magic system, one might argue.
I do think it should be noted that when we're talking about drab, Idris isn't drab in the sense that they don't have breath at all. They just do not give it away. You don't use your breath for anything. So like Nate said too, it's very much this religious, like, oh no, I would never like descend to the depths of ostentation and trying to draw attention to myself.
People of Idris, their society is very modest. It's focused on modesty, and Hallandren is kind of the polar opposite. They're all about colors and, exuberance.
And this could just be in D&D. We don't have magic. We don't use magic in this country up in the Highlands. But hey, you special people that make up the adventuring party, you're going to have to go into the land of magic, and you might end up having to use magic. In the level, you got your level 1, level 2 characters basically going in and starting the campaign.
And then you have basically this talk of Hallandren being a big deal, and it's the eventual destination that the party will go over to the ostentatious big city that is full of colors and everything. It certainly would be a good reward. So maybe you get to like level 2, level 3 in one area, and you finally get to go to the big city. That is a just massive culture shock.
I definitely think it's a good chance to do just like they kind of did in the book, kind of build up the anticipation by having all these different like legends and sayings of like, oh, all this crazy stuff goes on in this other country, and some of those will be true and some of them probably not, but it really builds up kind of the suspense and the anticipation of heading to this brand new, very different place.
So we're following Vivenna and Ciri's sisters. Vivenna, the oldest sister, was slated to marry the god king of Hallandren. But the king of Idris, was like, psych, I'm going to send Ciri instead, my youngest daughter, because Vivenna is too good, too valuable to me.
I love my firstborn more, so I want to keep her.
Well,
it's not, I don't even
no.
that.
I think it's important to note that these two nations are pretty much on the brink of war, and the king kind of thinks like, okay, this is pretty much inevitable. Even though we have this arrangement, the last war that they had was resolved by them promising like, yes, I'm going to send you my daughter to marry the God King. The king is very pragmatic and thinks like, Vivenna, even though she was originally slated to, is going to be of more use if she stays here in our country when war happens.
It's a matter of competence.
Yeah, exactly.
He thinks that his older daughter is more competent and therefore may like her more because of that.
Guys, this is false. Vivenna finds a letter from the king to the spy master that she was supposed to meet with, and in that letter, the king admits that he cannot send his firstborn. He just can't do it, even though he should, even though it's what's best for his people.
It's true. I forgot about that.
Yeah, he didn't. That's not the reasons,
so
though.
Even with that, I feel like it's a little bit of both.
It's implied throughout the entire book that Vivenna is better at politics, that she is more competent at the court. She is a better, more responsible person.
If that were true, why wouldn't you send Vivenna?
Because he wants Vivenna in Idris. Because she is going to be a better heir or ruler than Ciri
Okay,
is.
so I can agree that is implied, but it's not outright stated like his preference for Vivenna is. So
It is.
Well, no, it
I
is. At the beginning, he literally goes through just that line of logic, thinking about Vivenna is going to be a better leader for our people when war happens, or if, the king expires, Vivenna is going to be a better leader.
Yeah, but then later we get a direct contradiction to that thought from his own mouth.
Yeah, but the whole point of the book is for it to be set up that Vivenna is so good in this and that. And then throughout the story, we learn that Ciri is just as valuable as a human being, even though she's different. And she's also much better at certain things than Vivenna is. And we find that Vivenna, despite her confidence, is not great at certain things. And she flounders throughout the whole entire book. But that is the king's thoughts. He is like, Vivenna is more valuable. I want her.
Okay. I don't disagree that exists. I don't think that it is his primary reason, personally.
You think it's just because he likes his oldest daughter?
I didn't say just. I said I don't think it's his primary reason. I think his primary reason is the one that we get directly fed to us, the audience, which is him saying he can't send his oldest daughter because he loves her more. And all the other stuff is true, too.
I mean, we get both, though. We get both directly fed to us. We get the king's very thoughts, I believe, in the beginning of the book.
We may have to go back, research this, and then we'll come back and post in the comments about who exactly what was said and who was right.
Regardless, I do think it is a combination of both.
100% combination.
Reasons.
Whatever the ratio may be.
Because Ciri was a bit of a pain in the ass for the king.
Fuck the king. I think he's a dick, and he's a bad king.
I think he's a good king. I think he's making hard decisions.
You would want to live in Idris.
I don't want to live in Idris, but if it is my job to rule a kingdom, I'm going to make the hard choices. He's not saying I want to murder my younger daughter.
Yeah.
He feels bad, but
he
that's the
feels
decision
terrible
that has to be
about
made.
it. I think he's a good king who's just trying his best to look out for his people, even if it's difficult for him.
There's no easy way out of this.
Yep.
Meh.
But so what happens is Ciri, instead of Vivenna, ends up going to be the bride of the God King, which, by the way, from the very beginning, even the first time I read this, when I read God King, I just couldn't help but think 40K, the Emperor.
I got those vibes too. I was kind of hoping he would be more, and he kind of is. He has to get breath sacrificed to him. So it's part of their religion to sacrifice their own breath, the citizens to sacrifice their own breath for the God King so that he can continue living.
For the God King and for the returned.
The other
gods.
Yeah. I really like the religion of the iridescent tomes. This whole concept of needing to constantly sacrifice for your god in a measurable sort of way. You give up your soul. And this is what Lightsong struggles with the whole time. I thought it was great. I really loved Lightsong's struggle and just how the religion is and the incorporation of magic into the iridescent tomes.
Yeah, so
really
we
good.
haven't even explained what returned are. So to add more to this complicated system in religion, the returned are people who have died, but they have returned. They are like Jesus 3 days later, except they have come back with powers.
Not really powers.
They are stronger, aren't they? They come back with a big giant breath.
They come
they
back.
have a returned breath.
It's sort of said that
is the equivalent of the fifth.
It's said that they come back a single breath that is very, very powerful. So they act as, it's almost as if they have a lot of breaths, but they can't use them because that one breath keeps them alive.
And the Hallandren revere these people that come back as gods. So they are kept up in the palace as gods, but they also live in massive excess. Hedonistic lives, or afterlives, I suppose. They have to get a breath every week to keep looking young and keep looking sharp.
Well, to keep them alive.
Keep them alive. So they do end up accumulating. They eat a breath a week, basically.
Yeah, one breath a week to keep them alive.
They just have their returned breath, which is still enough to make them superhuman.
Whereas the God King gets 2 a week. So he's kind of building.
And the God King's just a returned.
Well, he's a baby returned.
Either way.
He's a stillborn baby
Yes,
returned.
he was an infant who had returned.
God, this is just so complicated.
It's really not. The whole concept of returned is that it's people are returned that have accomplished, that have done something great. It's never really clarified whether that's true or not.
Because they're fed propaganda.
And yeah, I kind of get the feeling that this is a propaganda thing, and probably not all of them did heroic things. But in the case of Lightsong, he did.
Well, Blushweaver is the goddess of honesty and beauty. So I get this feeling that she was like a courtesan that told off some elitist or whatever in public, and then he killed her on the spot.
That would be interesting.
Yeah, I want to know more about the returned and why these other returned come back. I hope that we explore it more in future books.
I don't think they come back for any particular reason of sacrifice. I think it just happened to be that Lightsong did a good job and then he died, and they're told what happened to them. Like Blushweaver comes back. Imagine the Hallandren people, the priests are like, "Oh shit, that's a returned. Let's go and get her into the palace." They put her in there and they're like, "All right, we're gonna feed you this story that you're gonna be the god of this, this, and this." And she's like, "Oh, okay, I guess I'm the god of this and this," because they don't have any memory of their past lives. They're told bullshit. The stories that they believe because they've been told it over and over and over that they come back for doing a certain thing, that may just be nonsense.
It could.
It very well could be.
Do you think what Larimar told Lightsong then is a lie?
I think in the case of Lightsong, like you guys said, it is probable that he actually did have some kind of heroic death.
However, this whole idea...
That being a requirement?
Oh, yeah, agreed.
I mean, I think there's a direct refutation of that in that the God King is always an infant who has returned.
Exactly.
And
what's
an
a baby
infant
going to do?
Yeah, exactly. So I am of the opinion that it is probably more or less random. And in the case of Lightsong, he happened to do a heroic thing, but probably not the case for all the rest of the
I agree
return.
too, and I think that this basically highlights the importance of having Lightsong as a POV character. He is the one god who did come back for an altruistic, sacrificial type of reason, and he is therefore the one god who does something truly sacrificial and helpful to the people that he returned to.
Which we didn't mention. The gods receive petitions, I think, I don't know if it's every day, but on a regular basis from people because they can give that one breath they have away that keeps them alive. They can give it away, and it will heal someone.
All right. We haven't even talked about D&D.
Yeah, let's get into the quest here.
A lot of book talk in this book.
A lot of just talking about how the book works because it's so damn complicated.
It's not though. Like
We're
as you go through it, it's all
in.
very easy to digest. But that I think it's worth talking about because it's so interesting.
It's not interesting, man.
It's not.
All right, D&D. Let's get to D&D, guys. So Ciri has a lot of political intrigue stuff. She's figuring out what the plot is in the court, and she has to deal with these priests that serve the God King, who do not like her and don't want her there and treat her very poorly and give off the vibe of that like they're going to do something to her. She's outright told at one point by Bluefingers, the head scribe to the God King, that there is some plot happening. They're coming after you. You got to be careful. So she is basically going around and talking to these different gods, talking to these different servants and high-profile people in the palace, figuring out how the government works and figuring out what exactly the plot is.
Bringing that into D&D, that's a lot of social checks. She's doing social every which way, and she's making investigative checks. I've been told that I need to have a kid with the God King, but I'm not.
Then somebody says, "Don't do that."
Yeah, someone says, "Don't do that," and then someone's telling her things aren't what they seem in the court. If you have a group of players that are very socially inclined or mystery fans, that might be everything you need to get the ball rolling.
This is like when we said that Merry and Pippin, or the hobbits in general in Lord of the Rings, they are like, we just want RP stuff. That's what Ciri's player wants. I mean, she just wants RP
Ciri's
stuff.
never in combat. So.
Yeah, if you're running a bunch of players who like Harry Potter or like doing, I guess, just more going around combat kind of stuff, this would be great.
Figuring out puzzles and stuff.
I think it would be pretty difficult to have someone actually like promised to, the God King in this case, like someone exactly in Ciri's place, but perhaps they could be like an entourage with Ciri, and Ciri is an NPC.
Yeah, they're her bodyguards. They're her sworn swords, or maybe you're just a group of folk who...
I like that. The group of representatives, it's not necessarily a princess. It's these 4 people representing Idris are now in the court.
Maybe you're all sent to marry different gods.
Oh, that's a good one. That's cool.
That would be a lot of one-on-one stuff, a lot of individual stuff, which it's possible to do that. I personally think it would be easier and a bit more fun to just have them be like an entourage in the court.
The idea of a mega dungeon, the idea that the party is sequestered away from the actual city itself and put in the palace as they're in this massive dungeon that is a different world. It's a different city from the actual city. That is pretty neat.
Yes, I like that a lot. And every palace belonging to a specific god can be a different themed dungeon as well, giving you, the DM, lots of flexibility in what you throw at your players. Maybe they go into one of these dungeon palaces, and it's a slow, arduous session. Get them out of there the next session and be like, all right, that was great for today, but tomorrow you have to go into Lightsong's palace, which is totally different, and it gives you the ability to give them different things in the same controlled environment.
Yeah, each priest's like temple or housing or whatever it is could be based on, whatever they're the god of, maybe.
Yeah, definitely. And because of this, I think you utilize the gods more than the book does. We see a lot of Lightsong and Blushweaver, and that's about it. We see a couple other gods a couple other times. And make one of the gods, like I would probably make one of the gods the actual bad guy, trying to overthrow the God King, per se. And that way you have this big, powerful, divine, quote-unquote, being that is a bad guy. That's a good bad guy with lots of cool abilities to be able to challenge your party later.
That's a great opportunity, yeah. You got a big bad guy, they're different from you, and for all intents and purposes, they are probably tough to kill, which D&D players like to kill tough things.
That said, if you really want to pull the old M. Night Shyamalama, I do like that Bluefingers ends up kind of being the mastermind of all this big plot.
Yeah, the loyal servant.
Yeah. The one who helps you in the beginning. We talked a little bit for Wise Man's Fear, the idea of having an NPC who seems very, very friendly and helps you out a lot, but turns out to betray you.
It can be tricky, but it's a very, very cool idea, and especially if you pull it off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the opportunity there to fight some of those gods, though, could still come up.
If I'm stuck in this mega dungeon, the first thing I'm trying to do is get the hell out. I want to break out. I want to play the character that has the maybe the acumen, the expertise to try and actually get out of the situation. I think that would be my goal if I were playing in this.
If you're running a long campaign, I think definitely those folks that are in the palace in those grounds, you need to get out into the city.
And then get supplies that you don't have available to you in the palace. You have infinite food and infinite clothing
and furniture,
and furniture,
just about anything you want,
but no rope. No knives,
no cool D&D stuff that you really, really want to have. And so you probably have to sneak out and sneak back in.
Yeah.
That's a cool element to keep into your campaign. And so with this arc of Ciri getting close to one of these gods, she does get close to one of the gods. It ends up being the God King that she gets close to. And I think this is a really cool way for the DM to use an NPC to influence the party. Where it's like, no, the God King isn't the Emperor who has like all these abilities and he is gonna... No, he's like a child in the book.
Yeah, he's basically a child.
And he has been so sheltered, he can't even use his own super uber powerful breath because they cut out his tongue. Very cool character, cool concept, and I think it's like Gandalf, except you're hamstringing him and he's not able to do whatever Gandalf can do at the moment to help the party. It's like an actually good NPC whose power level is brought down, but it could allow for you to bring his power level up much later in the campaign, kind of what like happens, and you can see some very, very cool stuff. I think Susebron is better than Gandalf as like a powerful NPC for the party.
I really like that idea of like that's a really good way to implement a very powerful NPC. It's not someone who can solve all the party's problems for them, or at least can't right now, but could be kind of almost a tool for the party.
Yeah, he still brings all the knowledge aspects that Gandalf brings. He just doesn't bring the magic or anything like that.
And just like in the book, at some point, if the party is able to like bring them their power back, that can be a cool moment.
Yeah, totally. So, we're talking about bringing the power back to the God King. Let's talk about Lightsong then.
Nice.
I don't know that he has a lot of D&D applicability, his story.
I'm sure he does.
Because...
He's a returned.
Okay, please.
A returned is one of the races in D&D.
Okay, so yeah, he can exist in D&D, but his character and the choices that he makes and the things that we see on the page, what's D&D about it? What is the mission for Lightsong? What is his motivation in D&D?
You're trying to figure out, I'm a god? This doesn't seem right. How am I a god? I don't feel like a god. I don't really do godly things. You're trying to undermine this entire religion. You're trying to figure out what you actually are. Maybe that's hidden for you in D&D. And you're like, what am I? What was I? That's a quest that he goes on. He's trying to figure out who he was. And in D&D, you could do that better than the way he does it. He just tries things and sees if he knows how to do it.
Look at me. I can juggle.
I can juggle.
Do you know I can do this?
I must have known how to juggle in my past life.
I do absolutely love this. We get all these little, moments of Lightsong being like, man, what was I? Was I a detective? Was I a soldier? A guardsman? What was I? And then in the end, he's like, you were a fucking scribe. You handled accounts.
You just liked puzzles. I liked that too, as just a quick side note, to show that somebody who's not like a typical fantasy hero can still go through the typical fantasy hero things. I thought that was very cool.
I think as we discussed like the short campaign format for the stuff before, I think it could be relatively easy to introduce a character who is one of the gods that they eventually meet, and be like, oh, this guy pretty cool.
Yeah, he's a reborn. It's from the Lineages race. That's from Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, the Reborn. You even do have the ability to get proficiency on certain things that you would have been good at in your past life.
This might be a different one, but is that the one that's like you came back for a specific purpose, and then once that purpose is fulfilled, you go away? Or is that like
That might be a subclass. That might be the rogue subclass that you're thinking.
It might be. It was something like that, though. Like you've come back from the dead for one like very specific purpose, and that could just be like whatever the campaign end is.
Maybe so. In which case, that would be accurate even with Lightsong, because he's told that his purpose is to fulfill a miracle.
Yeah.
Whether or not that's true, you may or may not figure out.
Another thing for Lightsong's kind of arc, or some of the things that happen to Lightsong outside of what we've already just discussed with like campaigns and stuff, is I think this could be a really cool thing to just add in as a short arc. Like one of your characters or multiple characters come into a place and they have some trait that makes this society think, oh, this is a god. This is what we have to do. You get all this like observing paintings, doing the foretelling thing, all that stuff. That could be a fun like short arc, and they kind of show you, they come and show you this piece of art, and you need to just interpret it. Like, what does this mean to you? And then they take it like very seriously.
I like that idea, especially if like the sign of divinity in this country or this nation isn't them being reborn, but it's like if you're a goblin.
Yeah, yeah.
You live such short, wise lives that we need to get as much of this divine knowledge out of you as possible. And then one of the players shows up in Hallandren as a goblin, and they're like, "He's a god!" They point at him, and they take him up to the palace.
This is wonderful.
That would be a fun arc, I think. And you could pick just about anything that some society will think is divine.
Exactly. He's what is the meme?
He is the Messiah.
I'm not the
Messiah. He is the Messiah.
What do you see in these paintings? And he's like, a lot of reds and blues. That's about it.
That's what Ryan's goblin sounds like, by the way.
Yeah, it's
goblins sound like this.
At our table.
Everybody knows
this
that.
is what goblins sound like.
Hey,
I'm goblin here.
Come on.
I see, I think, a firestorm or maybe a tornado. I don't really know how to interpret this. And then now there's an apocalypse.
Oh, that could be really fun if you actually make whatever your player comes up with, actually make it happen.
This makes the Returned so much better. This is just a 10 times better Returned version right here. Let's go ahead and switch over then to the actual D&D campaign that takes place in this book, which is Vivenna and Vasher and them's arc.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, by far the most interesting arc.
Yes, agreed.
I like all of them, and Lightsong makes me laugh, but this one I think was the most interesting.
Lightsong does make me laugh. By the way, a quick note on the narrator for the audiobook. Thought she did a really good job.
I really liked her too, yes.
All of her interpretations of all the characters made me feel really immersed.
Abigail Bresnahan, I believe. But look that up just to be sure.
Okay.
If that was right, though, let me say it again.
It's Alyssa Bresnahan, but go ahead.
Wow!
Damn it. It's Alyssa Bresnahan. Okay. I still got it in there. I'll just edit it.
Shout out to Alyssa Bresnahan.
Yeah, she did a great job. So yeah, Vivenna sneaks into this country after her sister to rescue her sister. This is pretty classic D&D quest.
Very uncharacteristic of Vivenna from what we've been told about her so thus far in the book. She's, the prim and proper one who's been kind of groomed to do this thing, and then her sister goes and they're like, you know what? I can't stand for this. This should be me.
Yeah, she's mad at Pops. It should have been her. It was my job to marry the God King.
And there's a lot of her getting there, and then several chapters of her being like, oh my God, this place. Oh my God, it's so different. And then
she's very much a prude.
Yeah, and she has a very cool evolution, the coolest evolution of any character, because when she first gets there, she has to meet with all the under-city bosses, crime bosses, and these people that are going to help them to start war between Hallandren and Idris, right?
Yeah, she's trying to meet up with her father's spies on the inside.
But she doesn't.
Did you say she's trying to start war between them? Because she's trying to stop war between them.
Well, it gets a little muddied, right? Because she gets there, the spy master he's too sick, and he is dying, and he has breath, she learns. And she's like, what? You have breath? You blasphemous piece of crap? And he's like, yeah, you take it. And then she gets all this breath, and she's like, oh no, I'm blasphemous. It's part of her evolution. But she also then gets to become a wizard or sorcerer or what have you and use magic in the campaign. And she ends up finding out that, like all D&D players after a while, magic is really, really useful. It does a lot of things.
I think it is such a good backstory for a sorcerer, too.
Yes. It's I agree totally. It'd be a great backstory if you take out the fact that the mercenaries end up betraying Vivenna. That's a great starting point for your campaign. Is these, hey, you're supposed to meet this guy. He dies. He gives you powers. Here we are. And now I'm kind of stuck working with these mercenaries to accomplish my mission in this strange city.
Tonkfa, Denth, Jules, and they're lifeless.
Oh, we didn't even explain lifeless. gosh.
Lifeless is a dead person brought back to life with a breath. A lifeless person is a better fighter than a live person because they don't get tired, they don't need to eat, they don't wince or grimace at pain, and so it's a very useful tool. And they retain their abilities from in life, so if somebody who's a wonderful fighter dies, they'll be a better lifeless fighter. And this is the type of lifeless that our mercenary friends have.
But I think it could be both. I think the idea of trying to basically sabotage a nation from within while you're working in kind of hostile territory could be a very fun setting to do things because you can, come up with different ideas to sabotage. And this whole time you're working in an environment where you have to be sort of low key. You might not necessarily be like attacked on sight by guards or anything, but you have to lay low. You have to be subtle about things, all the while trying to figure out new ways to negatively affect the nation's capability to wage war.
Yeah, I think those are definitely both able to be objectives that a party would be able to fulfill in a campaign like this, is where maybe you're just sent to sabotage.
Maybe if they can't come up with anything on their own or they've exhausted all their ideas, or at any point, you can have the native population, the Adrian Quarter, I forget what they call it, but the slums basically. You can have them reach out, hey, this stuff is happening, could you help us? And so, boom, another objective.
I think it's definitely a fun clandestine campaign.
Yeah.
You're in enemy territory and you have to undermine the entire government and religion and maybe save your sister.
And the DM here does a really good job of convincing the party that they are with good, friendly NPCs. The NPCs are very helpful at times and almost charismatic and charming at times, and Vivenna begins to kind of like them and trust them. But it turns out they were playing her the whole time.
How to lose your players' trust.
Yeah, this is when players start just grabbing NPCs by the chest and being like, who are you? What are you doing here?
This is my insight check! Just shaking them.
Or ultimately, how to teach your players to remember to roll insight checks on every
single interaction.
We roll a lot of insight checks at our table, I think.
Okay, sir, have a nice day. Insight check. Does he really mean that?
He doesn't really want you to have a nice day. He just said it out of courtesy. Kill him.
But then when she figures this out, she escapes. She's not with Denth and Tongfa anymore. She ends up working with Vasher, and they're basically doing the same thing as far as D&D goes. They're going and talking to people. They may not actually be ambushing Hallandren troops or anything and trying to cause strife or distress in the city, but still a very clandestine operation that you have to be stealthy about and you have to be very careful and smart about. Vasher also teaches her magic, but in Vasher, I think I would make an intelligence-based caster too.
Okay, so how about instead of trying to interpret Warbreaker into D&D, which class would you just then use? If you were to make this a campaign, what class would you use for this Vivenna character?
I think, especially when you consider Vasher, who shows himself to be pretty darn capable in melee, you could almost go with a blade dancer.
Blade Singer?
And then pick up some of those like animate object spells.
So I was going to go with Warlock.
For Vivenna?
Elaborate.
Someone who's going to be able to teach you certain abilities, these weird things that are going to happen to you, and you have so many invocations that you can then choose from to customize what you might want to do. So the breath is the patron. You gain the breath, and that is now you have another person with breath, another warlock of the breath maybe, and they're the one teaching the Vivenna character. Like, here's how you Eldritch Blast. Here's how you use the tongues one, that you can just understand any speech and stuff like that.
So in your mind, the tutor, Vasher, needs to be the same class as Vivenna?
Or at least of the same magic system. Or maybe this is not unheard of. You can just cherry pick the spells that are usable in your campaign. Maybe you only have the animate objects set up, and every subclass that can use magic has a pruned spell list that is these animate object type spells.
That is pretty interesting. I like this idea a lot because it makes you really have to think about how am I going to use my spells. You have to choose your spells very specifically based on your situation, and it's just a much different choice system about what's available, and you have to think way harder about it. I like this idea a whole lot. I think it's very cool.
I think if I were to run with this, I might give some more spell options, still trying to keep with the theme of like how this magic works. Just to give like players some more options for spells, because I think it's pretty narrow as it's displayed in the book. But that said, that's a cool idea.
You can also take a lot of spells and flavor them differently. For example, I take the spell Featherfall, and instead of saying the actual wording of the spell, it's just like you and a bunch of people that you can see do that. Instead, you can just say, I pour my breath into this huge curtain next to me, and it like grabs me and slowly lowers me down as I fall. It's still a reaction spell cast. You just say how you do it differently. You can take spells, put them on your spell list, and then think, how does this look like in the world of breath?
That'd be great. I would love to have that freedom for, like you said, a shorter campaign to be able to like interpret how to use those kind of spells. That'd be really neat.
That's one of my favorite things in D&D is cool flavorings of spells. And an easy way to start and like kind of think of neat things is look at the components required. You know, maybe for like Fireball, they take that bit of sulfur and bat guano, and you know maybe they rub it in their hands and blow on it, and then out comes this huge gout of fire. It does things like.
That's funny.
Yeah, I love flavoring spells.
It's like when you're making a recipe off online. You can make it exactly, or you can add your own little.
And so taking this concept of you can have any spellcaster, you can have any spell, you could just flavor it for this world. I kind of ran with that idea when I was thinking of classes for these various characters. So for Vivenna, I made her a cleric because she is all about Astra. She talks about Astra the whole time, and she has this weird evolution in her relationship with her god. And so I thought, what if she started off as like a life cleric, and she ends up changing in the campaign to something like a knowledge or arcana cleric? And you could flavor it differently where she changes into a sorcerer or something like that because she's given the breath, and that's cool too. But I felt like her relationship with her religion is the central turmoil inside of her, and I thought that would be really cool to make the character around that.
Yeah, that's very interesting. When you said cleric, and
but this does depend on the spells being flavored for the world,
yeah, of
obviously.
Course. But that's fun.
Let's talk about character classes real quick. What about these other things? Did you think that there was these other characters, was there anything that really stood out to you about who could be what?
Lightsong is a commoner. No, I think he might be I think he could be a mastermind rogue or something like that, who's able to use his intelligence as a secondary modifier to do the things he does.
That's exactly what I thought he was.
First thought for me was like Bard for Lightsong, just because he's so charismatic. But other than him just having high charisma, I don't think anything really screams Bard.
How many? What's Lightsong's base stats?
I mean, he gets great base stats, right? He gets returned stats.
Yeah, 20s all around.
20s and everything.
He's a fucking god.
Not 20s, but like nothing lower than 16, probably. 2 16s, 2 18s, 2 20s. But I definitely thought Lightsong was a rogue. I had him as either a mastermind or an inquisitive.
Inquisitive. Yeah, that's a good one too.
It could be pretty cool to do a one-shot in that same universe, especially if you're like running a campaign already or something like that. So everyone plays gods, and they get 2 16s, 2 18s, 2 20s, and just make like a pretty powerful character. That could be fun.
Kind of like the fight nights that we run sometimes. We'd have all these decked out characters then fight each other. No misses.
No misses, just slugfest.
I felt like, personally, Denth is a blade singer who has forsworn his casting. He only uses the blade song these days. Because the way that his movement is described, he's like faster than anybody. and he is an amazing swordsman. And so it just felt Blade Singery to me. But you could also, you could
He
make
just has high dex.
you can make anybody, you can make him a fighter or a but the fact that he is, spoilers, a returned, I think adds to the fact that he has all of this power in him. He has the ability, to change his hair and stuff. So yeah, it felt like he had some magic in him. So I wanted to, in D&D, like we've said before, people get more abilities oftentimes. But Tong Fa is just a straight up fighter.
Tong Fa I love that dude.
Really? I didn't like him.
I liked him from the very beginning and, until the betrayal. And I was like, aw, man. I thought he was funny. I liked the narrator's voice for him. I liked his jokes, his humor.
Yeah, I wasn't a big fan of him. I didn't, super dislike him except for the fact that he's a weird sadist.
Well, then, yeah, once all that was revealed, I didn't like him. Upon getting further information, I then changed my mind.
Unacceptable. You stick to your original opinion, or you're a flip-flopper.
Animals pinned up on the wall is not a good enough reason. Betrayal is not a good enough reason. What about Vasher?
Man, he does a lot. I almost, like I said before, I kind of wanted to call Vasher a blade singer just because he uses a lot of magic-y things, but he does a lot of melee things. Although, he could be Pact of the Blade Warlock with Nightblood.
That's a good one. That's one I didn't consider.
Oh, yeah. Nightblood is a character in and of itself. It is this inanimate object that has been given sentience by having so many breaths stuffed into it, and that its entire mission, as you give anything a command, like you command a rope to grab things, they made this sword and they said, as a joke, destroy evil.
I don't think it was a
joke. I don't think they were fucking around with 1,000 breaths.
Off to me, it was like, what's a sword gonna do? Let's destroy evil. And then now, it doesn't know what evil is, though. That's a whole magic item that you could give to someone.
In fact, was given Nightblood as emeritus.
What is it? Nightblood is basically like a nice version of Darkrazor. That's the D&D black sentient sword, right?
I don't think...
There's the Critical Role one. Oh, Black Razor. Is that what we're thinking?
So I made Vasher a battlesmith artificer with kind of this weird reimagining of him making Nightblood as his iron defender.
Okay.
However, I like the Hexblade Warlock way better. I think that fits really well.
Yeah, no, I like that, though. That's a really interesting take on it, using the battlesmith artificer thing. Or his defender could be like his cloak. Because I think the command he uses is just protect me or something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, that would take some...
That's good flavoring for the world right there.
Yeah, it would take some, it might take some fiddling and things like that, but I think you could make it work. And it would be really, really neat.
Well, so the end result here is the plot is successful. The plot from Blue Fingers, from Ari's arc, is successful. They get all the command phrases for all 40,000 lifeless.
Ari's arc?
What? Oh, I said Ari, huh?
Forever in your head, isn't she?
No, I'm thinking about mine. I did a lot of outline work last night, and I did some...
No, it's my character. That's...
Okay, you're right. I was talking about your character. Siri. Anyways. 40,000 lifeless soldiers are marching on Idris to wipe him out. And this is in order to get Idris to go to war with Hallandren. Hallandren go to war with Idris. They destroy each other so that this little country down the coast, Pankal,
subjugated
can
nation,
no longer be subjugated. And this big battle takes place in this palace, mega dungeon area. Very cool, that ending situation. You have to sneak into the palace from a certain way. You have to deal with these lifeless soldiers. You have to deal with one or two gods that are in on it or something maybe. That whole sequence is just chock full of stuff. And in the book, I really like Lightsong's revelation.
Totally.
And then he's like, this is real. Something sent me back. It had to be for a reason. And you know what? You can interpret that however you want to. But in his mind, it was destiny. And I thought it was Like, it was the only time that the magic was ever used that I, like, had a stand-up and cheer moment.
Yeah, it was well done.
Anytime that Vasher did it, it was kind of cool, but it's also a little complex, like Ryan was saying. But when the god, who is part of this hedonistic, non-sacrificial society, he then sacrifices himself because he realizes that he does believe in the religion or whatever. Beautiful moment. Best moment of the book.
Yeah, I loved when Larimar explained to him, and especially when Lightsong was kind of thinking about it as he comes to this revelation, like, you are a god to me.
That was
Yeah.
sweet. I liked that.
Very sweet. Very touching moment.
You know, Vivenna and Vasher sneaking in, or Vivenna sneaks in after Vasher to rescue him, basically. And then you can fight these guys that betrayed you. That's always great when you get to get vengeance. I also really liked... This isn't really translatable to D&D, unfortunately, but how did you beat Arsteel? You never beat Arsteel. You could never beat Arsteel. And he gives him all the breath, which makes him, like, eyes roll back, and he's tripping balls for a second. And in that moment, he stabs him. He's like, yeah, nobody would ever do that. That's how I beat Arsteel. And I was like, damn. Finally, somebody who is not as good at combat beat somebody who is much better at combat. That happens all the time in fantasy movies, but it's often kind of glossed over and it's accidental or something like that. But he actually used a tactic that there was no defense against, and it was his mind beating the body, and I thought that was really, really great.
I'll tell you what, this hadn't occurred to me before you said, like, I'm not sure how this could be done in D&D. It wouldn't really be applicable. But, and this I think would take a lot of attention to make sure it was balanced, but breaths could maybe have some sort of analog to spell slots. And, you know, maybe it could be a thing. You can give your spell slot, your breath, away to someone else, and it could affect them for a moment.
Yeah,
But
there's something there.
Again,
Yeah.
I think that would take a lot of doing, but
I see
there's
some
I think
connections.
There's something there.
Again, for I think a shorter term campaign, I think the players, at least at our table, would be happy to do that little bit of extra work in making these.
It's a dangerous thing to mess with stuff that so heavily affects the balance of the game. It's kind of the danger of excessive homebrew.
We'll talk about next time when we do Powder Mage about the times when I messed with the Wizards of the Coast formula.
Yeah.
We had some adverse effects.
We had a good time, but yeah. Oh, man. Especially if you do anything that messes with the action economy, that's is dangerous.
But Vivenna gets Vasher. Vasher beats Denth. Lightsong saves the God King, and now the God King can use all of his magic, and it's awesome. Nobody can even touch him. And as it turns out, Kalad's phantoms, as it turns out, Vasher was Kalad, was Peacegiver, was a many people throughout history.
And Zahel. But that's
that's a different one. And
yeah.
and it turns out that Kalad's phantoms are statues throughout the city, encased in bone, and the bones are
they're
awakened.
bones
And,
encased in stone.
I won't get into it. But because of this, they are unbelievable warriors. It's basically an automaton. It's basically a warforged, and these are like 20 lifeless, 50 lifeless. And so they run after him and they butcher them all. Man, this has got to leave Hallandren in a really vulnerable position.
It's true, but
They don't have any soldiers.
I don't think Idris is really looking to attack.
You're right. There's implications, though, that there's a good chunk of other kingdoms and societies around here. Like, they talk about people across the sea and stuff.
Yeah.
And at the very end, Yestiel, Arsteel's brother, is supposedly with this other country somewhere. And so, maybe there's going to be a power shift after Hallandren loses all its troops. You know, as those things tend to happen.
Leaves it open for, continuing your campaign in another country if you really want to, because Vivenna goes along. She decides, like, after all I've been through now, I don't really want to go back to just being a nice princess. I want to stick with you and go do neat stuff. Maybe this was, I always say this, maybe this was all just a very long, elaborate backstory for Vivenna.
Yeah, and then she goes to, never mind, I won't say anything.
As always with the works of Brandon Sanderson and within the Cosmere, there's a lot of connections to other books. Or not a lot of things, I should say, but there's always a couple things.
All right, so what is your most D&D moment of the book?
I, as always, had a difficult time selecting one that was like super D&D, but I settled on when Vivenna is still working with the mercenaries. They set up this plan to I actually forget what exactly their objective was, but they act like they're robbing this cart, and then other people like start a fire somewhere and do all this stuff. And that just like stuck out to me as like I could totally see a party coming up with this like somewhat convoluted plan to pull something off in the middle of a town square, you know?
That's a very clever DM moment if you can pull that off. You know, you're with these NPCs that are actually betraying you, but in that moment they have to look like they're helping you, and you need to accomplish this goal, but you can't let the player see that that goal is being accomplished.
I was gonna say my most D&D moment is Denth's betrayal of Vivenna, and he's like, "Unfortunately, princess, we're here to kill you," and roll initiative. And after all of that gets done, all of the the big surprise and everything, and the one-liner, straight into roll initiative. What about you, Steve?
So I thought of two. The first one is when Ciri wants to talk to Bluefingers. She sends a message to him through one of her Pancall servants. And then she talks to Bluefingers. And at this point, there have been a couple of conversations between them about the plot and everything. And she straight up says, "Will you help me and the God King get out of the palace, if need be?" And he says, "Yes." And inside, the DM is going like, "Oh yeah, make your plans." You know? And the NPCs just totally got it wrong, and they fell right into the DM's hands.
Hook, line, and sinker.
Hook, line, and sinker. The other one is, I just thought of it when I brought it up, Vasher defeating Arsteel. This is, the DM creates a scenario, and the player just sees this point A to point B, and the DM did not consider how this could have happened. And as it turns out, you could kill this thing, this ultimate bad guy that you made. Watching Critical Role, I think in this most recent campaign, Campaign 3, and Liam's character, Orem, he has a rope that he hooks around a big beast, and they're next to some big cog wheel thing, and he takes the rope, he puts the other end of it in the wheel, and Matt was forced to make the monster get sucked up into this giant grinding wheel, and it did like 40-something, 50 points of damage to this monster at level 4. I remember seeing that and thinking, that is so smart to use this big contraption to cause damage rather than your own sword or what have you. And that's also dependent on a roll, an attack roll. But if you say, I just dropped the rope in the gear and now it's sucking it up, well, yeah, physics says that it's just going to suck him up. And I think that Vasher here made an incredibly smart realization and used it to his advantage. And the DM was forced to reward him for that.
I love that a lot because I am a heavy proponent for DMs rewarding players who figure out some clever thing, you know, whether it be from like stuff like this could be just, you know, using stuff that you've come across before in your campaign. Like maybe you gave someone some breath and they're like, the DM describes like, oh, they shudder for a moment and their eyes roll in the back of their head. And you remember that and like, oh. Or just players using the environment in general.
As DMs, provide something for them to use. Maybe there's a big rock tipping over a cliff.
Don't be afraid to reward players, you know, for doing stuff that's not really covered in the book.
Don't get upset that they ruin your combat encounter. They didn't ruin it. They just earned that utter victory. And now next time you make a combat encounter, you got to remember that and don't let them have that opportunity.
Try to avoid my precious world syndrome.
On the flip side, if your players do something real clever, you as a DM can use that against the party later, too. So, well, if y'all can do it, so can I. Well, all right, y'all. That's been our coverage of Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. If you like what we do, please subscribe, leave a comment, do all that stuff. You can find us on Spotify, YouTube, all those places. We just recently started a thing on Fiverr, so if you're, looking for a little bit of help with, designing a D&D campaign, character settings, things like that, you can come use some of our services, and we'll talk to you and help guide you through creating some of those things.
And everywhere you look, we're Dungeon Vets.
Oh yeah, we're Dungeon Vets.
Also at dungeonvets.com.
Also there.
Dungeonvets.com.
See you next time.
Bye.
Goodbye. I love you. Bye.